Hey, so I'm here with legendary artist and writer Phil Hester. Um, you know, I really could list off all the things he's worked on seemingly for, the whole length of the podcast, so I won't do that. But you
Why
know,
not?
Green Arrow with first Kevin Smith wrote the first arc, and then he wrote subsequent arcs. Man, there's a million things. Irredeemable Ant-Man. Um, most
Don't
recently,
don't don't look to
sorry.
me for help. Don't look to me for help. I don't remember half of this.
So most recently it was Gotham City year one, right?
Yeah, I mean I've done stuff since then, but that was probably my last big project.
Right, yeah, right. So I guess we'll just get right into it. What would you say are like the early comics that got you into comics? Or I don't even know for sure if you're even maybe you're not one of these people who was like reading from a really young age. Like I've talked to people who got into it, as adults, and that's totally fine too. But I'm
No,
just
I was into it. I was into
sorry.
it when I was a kid, and I'm 57 now, which means when I got into comics, you couldn't you sort of couldn't be a picky shopper about
Hmm.
what kind of fantasy material you engaged with because there was a dearth of it. So um, when I was coming up, like I wouldn't consider myself a sword and sorcery fan, but because I liked heroic fiction, I was into Conan, you
Huh.
know, or because I like science fiction, I was into Doctor Who.
So
Um,
this is probably like this is
70s and
probably
80s.
yeah, 70s. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
So I was like reading anything I could get my hands on, especially comics. And I was lucky that I have a set of uncles on my mother's side who are not a lot older than I am. Like when I was a little kid, they were like adolescents and teenagers.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so they were right there with when the 70s, the Marvel boom of the 70s and stuff. And so whenever I'd go to my grandma's house, they would have comics laying around.
Hmm.
And I would pick up, whatever it was. If it was like the corniest, like cuz like in the 70s DC had a corniness problem. Like
Huh.
I would but I would read like the corniest like DC thing and then I would turn around and read like the wildest like you know savage sort of Conan they had laying around, whatever.
Huh.
Just like uh I would read everything from Superman family to heavy metal, you know.
Huh.
So I was into all of it, but like I think the comics that really like sort of sparked my interest in them uh, as a deeper subject matter were my uncles had these reprints of the Len Wein, Bernie Wrights, and Swamp Thing run,
Oh, okay.
and yeah, and so I had that on sort of one end of my experience, and then the other end of my experience was E-Man was coming out, the Nick Cutie, Joe Staton E-Man comic.
Oh, interesting.
So, like on one end, there's this like really bright, bouncy, like joyful comic, and on this other end, this is like super spooky, dark, murky comic, and
Right.
but they both like spoke to something inside of me, and I think it's sort of, I think it's evident in my work. Like even when I'm doing something that's really bright, there's like some dark edges to it. And then every time, even when
Hmm.
I'm doing something like horror oriented, there's still sort of like an intractable cartooniness to my style that I attribute to those sort of twin poles of my early comic book reading.
That's
And
really
then when I,
interesting. Because I see that completely. I mean,
yeah,
I see like the dark, like, you know, very large areas of dark and like heavy shadows. But I get what you mean that it's also there's like a stretchy cartoon
yeah,
quality.
yeah. And then about when I was like 13, Frank Miller took over Daredevil.
Hmm.
And I went from kind of an indiscriminate comic reader and I had a vague idea that I wanted to be a cartoonist because I could draw from a young age, and I like to make up my own stories. So comics seemed like a very natural avenue for me. And I knew I wanted to be a cartoonist, but like, am I going to be like John Byrne? Am I going to be like Jack Kirby? What
Hmm.
am I? What kind of cartoonist I'm going to be? And then those
Would
Frank
you
Miller
say those
Daredevil.
guys are like big influences for you, like a John
Oh
Byrne
yeah, I
or?
mean, uh, I was asked to like really early in my career, I was asked to put together like a list of influences for an interview, and it was
Hmm.
like a whole typewritten. It was a whole typewritten page. Like I filled all the spaces, but yeah, I just thought it would be like a super mainstream kind of, Don Newton. Um, I was a big Jim Starlin guy then too, but
Huh.
like, uh, but then when I saw those Frank Miller Daredevils, I was like, oh, that's what I want to be. I want to be that kind of cartoonist. I want to be somebody who, um, like, drawing is important, but not as important as storytelling.
Hmm.
And that dragged me into like really studying like the great storytellers in comics, like Toth and Kriegsdean and Kurtzman and guys like that.
Hmm.
And yeah, I would say so. Those were like the two thunderbolts. Seeing those Swamp Things when I was a little kid, and then seeing well, I guess I was still a little kid, but seeing those Daredevils when I was like 13. And that really just set me on a path to like want to be a writer artist, not just an artist.
Right. Yeah. And that's a really interesting time because a lot of those comics are like sort of like the second generation, of creators who, okay, these guys were, or I guess rather first generation, or these were the
Yeah,
first people who are fans of like, these 60s and 50s superhero or
right.
mainstream comics, and then they themselves became like working professionals. You're kind of like, the generation after that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and
That
I
then
like
you were raised on them.
yeah, and there's two ways to look at that. Like, I think some people think that when comics start to feed on itself like that, it becomes kind of like inbred. But
Right.
there's another angle to that, which is like once comic books get their own language, especially superhero comic books, each new generation is refining that language more than like wallowing in it. And I mean the better artists and writers of that generation are learning from the people that came before, not just regurgitating. Um, but
Yeah, I
there's
mean,
a
and
lot of
I would say
we're
also like I'm sure Frank Miller like was I'm sure he was reading other stuff, or he still is today reading stuff besides comics, and has, what I
oh
mean.
sure,
I'm sure he has other
sure.
influences. So I
Yeah, I
feel
mean
like, sorry.
I mean Daredevil's just as much about the all night kung fu theaters in New York as it
Right,
is
yeah.
Gil Kane.
Yeah. And the famous example I would say is like, I highly doubt Jack Kirby, for instance, was just reading comics. Like he's
Oh no,
probably
no.
fairly well read.
Yeah, I was for a time. I was well. You still can, I think, but there's like Jack Kirby's grandson, like was sent out these things called Kirby Care packages,
Huh.
and for like a hefty subscription, like $100, you get a little care package of his, and it would just be like random stuff from his grandpa's studio.
Huh.
And one of the things I got in one of those packages was like a science fiction pulp that Jack had read, you know,
Huh.
and it's clear that he was like a voracious reader of all kinds of literature, fantastic, pulp, classics, whatever. And he was clearly influenced by all those things, and he was like kind of like an engine, like whatever came in, he would find a way to digest it and turn it into something new and give it back to the world, which was pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and he was so prolific, like he was doing so many pages per day. Like you sort of have to do that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but anyway, you mentioned Swamp Thing. I mean, that's another amazing book. It's like, there's a part of me where I'm a little jealous. It's like, you grow up at this time, like the great, Bernie Wrightson, on Swamp Thing.
yeah.
And I'm just thinking like, I might have my timeline a little confused here, but didn't you you illustrated Swamp Thing in the 90s, is
Yes,
that
yeah,
right? Or
so like I was reading it in the 70s, mostly in reprints, and then hunting down back issues. And then when I was a teenager, the Marty Pascal Tom Yates series came out, and that's the series that Alan Moore would take over eventually.
okay.
And because Alan was so, and the series I would eventually draw too, I guess it's the same series.
Right, right,
um,
right.
uh, but yeah, I think people, because Alan Moore was such a thunderbolt, and and Steve Bissett and John Toddleman and Rick Veitch and all those guys, um, because they were such a thunderbolt, people forget that the Pasco Tom Yates run was really good too. And I came on like many generations after that. I came on when the book was in like the 130s, 140s. Yeah, the 140s.
Hmm.
Um, but it was that very book that I was reading in high school, and I thought, hey, Swamp Thing's back. And yeah, it was kind of a surreal moment because it's sort of like rooting for a baseball team your whole life and then getting drafted by that team.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what is that like? Where, is there a pressure there? Do you feel
Yeah, it was very strange because like I don't I have a hard time like regarding my own work objectively. So I know there are a lot of people that really enjoyed the work I did on that run, but I don't think I was I was in my mid 20s, and I was sort of like probably not ready for that big of an assignment,
hmm.
but I got it anyway. And it's sort of like, to go back to that baseball analogy. So like you grew up rooting for this team, and let's say you're the worst center fielder that team ever had. it's
Yeah,
it's
then
still
that's
cool
like
to
a but there's part of you that might be like, you don't want to be on record as the
right.
worst. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So there's a big part of me it's like that, and then the other half of me is like, but it's still cool to be in the uniform, you know.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
um so yeah, I had conflicted feelings about that. And then recently, it was announced that they're going to do an omnibus collection of those Swamp Things I drew and that Mark Miller wrote. And it, I had to look back at all that stuff again. And I was like, well, on some of this stuff, I was better than I thought, and on some of it, I was worse than I thought.
Huh.
But that's just if you look back, I would hope that you improve over 30 years.
Right, right.
And I feel like I have, but it was kind of a tough. It's sort of like reading poetry you wrote in high school.
Yeah,
It's going
no,
to be
I
a
mean,
lot of
as a writer, like, I don't really want to show you something that I worked on when I was 25, to be honest with you.
right.
It's probably not, it's
There's a
probably
lot of cringe
embarrassing.
in there.
Yeah. Just thinking about that though is like that kind of was it's interesting to think like that was Mark Miller's first thing too, right? Or in mainstream.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, he'd been doing things here and there, and he wrote the animated Superman book.
Oh, that's right. But that wasn't
Yeah,
Swamp Thing before that, or again, I could have my
it might have been
timeline mixed up.
concurrent.
Okay.
But I didn't know who Mark was. I didn't know who Mark was
Right.
because
This was still
he
like
was
at the
just
very
coming up.
beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's even younger than me. So, like, I was like 25, and he was probably 22 or 23.
That's
Like,
just
he was
crazy
super
to
young.
think, it's just like
Yeah, that
Mark
they were just
Miller is
that they
22,
just.
you're 25, and it's just like, okay, here, I feel like this, maybe I'm jaded to say this, but I feel like this doesn't happen today where, it's,
I don't. Yeah, I don't know if it does, but it was wild. I mean, Stuart Moore was our editor, and he was a gutsy guy, and he was just like, yeah, let's let these kids do whatever they want. It was, I think, helped by the fact that the first arc, at least, was co-written by Grant Morrison.
okay, that's
So
right. Right.
yeah, so we had like kind of we
And
kind of got a little bit of white glove treatment from DC because Grant was on board.
right.
But
And
after
Miller
that,
was kind of like his protege at that time. So it's
yeah, at the
sort of,
time they were like, I mean, they were writing partners. They wrote that arc, exquisite corpse style, meaning
oh,
Grant.
like, so like he did one part, then he would hand it off to Mark. And
Yeah,
then,
Grant would write an issue, then give it to Mark, and then Mark would write an issue and give it to Grant. And
Huh.
I think they were coordinating. They weren't. It wasn't a true exquisite corpse where you're trying to screw over the next person
Right. They had some
by
idea what
writing.
it was.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing, so they were like they were coordinating. But it was so we had a we had a little bit of an in at DC, a little bit of cachet just from Grant,
Hmm.
and but we had a long run. I mean, I haven't really crunched the numbers, but I drew that book for 3 years, which is a long time. And
Yeah, I mean, if it's got to be upwards of 36 issues, right? Or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah, it's right up there. It's right. I mean, I had a fill-ins here and there, but it was like a lot.
So
And
you
I
were
was like, wow.
monthly.
Oh yeah, it was a
Yeah,
monthly.
yeah.
And Kim DeMolder was like a steadying hand too. He had been on the book before we came on. And then the most amazing fact of all is that our colorist, Tatiana Wood, was the colorist on Swamp Thing Volume 1, Number 1.
Hmm.
And she'd colored every Swamp Thing
Hmm.
artist. And she was
So there was
there.
kind of a legacy there.
Yeah, she was, and that's Wally Wood's widow, which was
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
another like heady thing about getting that assignment. It's like, oh, I'm working with, Wally Wood's ex.
Yeah, I mean, um, this podcast is sort of like I sort of pitch it as like it's like a comics podcast for people who don't read comics. So like
Oh yeah.
if you're out there and you don't
Last
listen
explain.
and you don't really like you're not like hardcore or whatever, just to give you an idea, that's like, you're working with Wally Wood's wife. It's like I'm sure for you it must feel a little bit like you are like sort of touching history a little bit or brushing up
Yeah.
against
Oh,
history.
very much so. And then also it sort of drove home the fact that like, oh, I'm trotting my garbage out where, she's used to coloring
Right.
uh, Bernie Wrightson and Tom
Right, yeah.
Yates and Nestor Redondo, and
Yeah,
here am I
yeah.
with my garbage.
That's interesting. So that was a very interesting time because I guess that must have been under Vertigo.
Yeah, it was just after it became I think it became a Vertigo book with 129, and I came on at 141.
Oh,
So it had
interesting.
been a Vertigo book for like, a little more than a year.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm just thinking that time was sort of a crazy time where I guess around 96 um like Marvel went bankrupt and it was a big time
Yeah.
sort of implosion of the industry. And I'm just curious if like, you have any stories from that period where it must have been like you just got there, it must have felt like, and then
Yeah.
I'm sure there were nights where you felt like, I guess the world is ending. I guess comic books are going to be gone tomorrow, I guess. Like, you
I
know?
was so I was and I am such a Pollyannish person that like I didn't see any of that coming. Like I like
Huh.
um all that Marvel malfeasance and stuff and that all the shenanigans with distributors and speculators, um all that was I was oblivious to all that. I mean, I kind of knew it was all going on, but I'd also like in the really early 90s attended we used to have this thing called ProCon, which was a convention for professionals only, and it was held for a couple of days before WonderCon. So you'd go to ProCon and then you'd go to WonderCon. But
Hmm.
ProCon was all just workshops and seminars between professionals, and it was great. And I went to a Joe Kubert lecture, and the one of the things that just rang like echoed in my head from that lecture was like Joe standing up there and saying, "Look, I've been through the death of comics 6 times." you know,
Huh.
and I was like, "Oh yeah, it's like cyclical. It kind of like people think this is the end all the time.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
anytime there's any sort of stumbling block, but really it's just sort of an adjustment period." And now Marvel's this huge juggernaut part of Disney. Um, and in my lifetime, it was bankrupt. You
Right.
know,
No, yeah, me too. I mean, it's crazy to think like, 96 they're bankrupt and then I guess Iron Man came out in 2008, I think, and it's not that much time and to go from bankrupt to sort of the biggest thing in the world that, it often feels
yeah,
like at times is just a
yeah, it's very
crazy
strange.
comeback story.
Yeah, and so you can't like if you zoom out and look at things, you take the macro view of things. it's easy to see how like I mean, everything in the world is like built on this kind of shaky
Hmm.
foundation, like modern life is. But I was so passionate about comics. I was like, I was focused in like, I don't care. Like Marvel could go away tomorrow. I will still find a way to make comics. And I still feel that way today.
Hmm.
Like I will find a way to make comics one way or another, even if I'm not gainfully employed by them.
Hmm. It's kind of interesting to think though that yeah, I mean you mentioned Kubert. He probably, I mean, I could be totally off of my numbers here, but he probably lived through like the Senate hearings in, the 50s
Yeah.
and stuff. And just,
Yep.
you're absolutely right that, I mean, again, for people who aren't hardcore comic book people, in 1954, the Senate had hearings to determine whether, I mean, I feel silly even saying this, but they had hearings to
That's okay.
determine, they had hearings to decide if comics were basically corrupting the youth, like contributing to juvenile delinquency, I think is the,
Yeah. And it was right before TV really blew up. So thankfully TV came along and became the new scapegoat. It was a
right,
riper target, so
right, yeah,
um, it kind of took the heat off. But I mean, there was never any real like legislative action. The hearings themselves, scared the industry into policing itself.
right, right.
And the Comics Code Authority was established.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's almost I
Which, if you
often,
want to, if you
sorry.
want to talk about the arc of history, that was still in place when I started in comics. The Comics
Yeah.
Code
No.
still
Yeah. I
existed.
mean, it wasn't really even abolished until got to be the aughts, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't
I
think they
mean, a lot of
completely
people
stopped.
voluntarily Marvel pulled away from it before that, and then, but the very first one of the very first pages I ever drew for like first comics. One of my first pro gigs was doing backups in a Nexus and the Badger
Oh,
when they
cool.
were when they were at First Comics, and the very first splash page I ever drew got spiked by the Comics Code,
Oh, man.
and I was like, "What happened? I don't think I did anything gross, or." But I showed a character shooting up. A junkie was shooting up in the splash page, and that ran afoul of the code.
Hmm.
You could not show someone shooting up,
Hmm.
and so I had to redraw it. So yeah, the Comics Code was still alive and well when I started.
I think I remember one of the big things of moving away from that was Stan Lee wanted to do something that was sort of an anti-drug story, and
Yeah,
they didn't want to let him do that.
no, and Marvel, if I remember everything correctly, Marvel pulled Spider-Man out of the Comics Code for that story arc, and then
Right.
put him back in. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. It's just funny because it's like they're trying to do an anti-drug story. Isn't
yeah.
that
Well,
in theory that you should want that, right?
the code was so ill-conceived from the beginning that it's like to expect any sort of like consistency from them was probably misguided.
Right. Yeah. Um,
I mean, they spiked they to me the most egregious thing. There's an awesome EC story about there's this a story about an astronaut going to an alien world and like trying to explain to them how they're too savage to join the League of Planets or whatever. And then at the end of the story, the astronaut takes his helmet off and he's black, which in the 1950s was like, oh, everyone assumed that the astronaut would look like Buck Rogers.
hmm,
And it was like kind of shocking. Like, of course, there won't be racial prejudice in the future. Of course, our astronauts will be black. And
hmm.
the character had sweat glistening on his
Right. I
um,
remember. Yeah,
dark
that was the
skin.
thing, right?
Yeah,
That
and the
was
code was like, "Oh, you cannot have bodily fluids in comics, and sweat is a bodily fluid, so it's got to go."
that's
Yeah,
just
it's
so
just
wild.
like absurd things.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through periods where I've very, deeply obsessed about the Senate hearings and just, if you actually read the transcripts of the hearings, it's just completely crazy the kind of stuff that was said. Like Frederick Wortham, very famously said I guess this one of the senators talking to him was saying would you say it's similar to like you keep telling a lie over and over again, and it's kind of similar to like Hitler's big lie, right?
Yes,
And
right, right.
Wortham is like, I hate to say it, but I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book
Yeah,
industry. And it's
yeah,
just
right.
whoa, like it's just wild to say that.
And
It's
it
also
doesn't help that
very
like
sorry.
Bill Gaines is whacked out of his minds on
Oh yeah,
diet pills
no.
when he's
Yeah, I was just gonna.
testing.
I was just about to say, like, he completely got jazzed up, like, essentially on amphetamines, and then he gave a really.
Yeah,
I actually think he gave like a really good speech where he's like,
yeah, but he's
"R-
like actually shooting plumes of sweat off his brow.
right. Yeah, no, I mean, and he gave a very good initial speech where he was like, "Oh, are we really so afraid of our own children that we're afraid they're going to
Yeah,
become murderers and thieves by reading a book? Like, I never knew anyone who was hurt by reading a book." Okay, and he's like, it's a
right.
very good speech. Like, I'm saying completely objectively is well,
Yeah,
I can't say objectively, but from in my opinion, it was a great speech. And but his problem was, like you said, is he crashed pretty hard after that, where then he was like, practically comatose for when they started questioning him. He didn't have endurance, but
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so I guess going back to this stuff. So around we talked about sort of in the '90s. Okay, there was a big time speculator busts that resulted in Marvel going bankrupt. A lot of comic book stores went out of business. But then, like in the beginning of the aughts, um, I think you could argue there was something of like a little bit of like a Renaissance era of comics, like around 2000. Um, and that's when you were on Green Arrow. At first, working with Kevin Smith. I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit because that was sort of a big that's a big get, I think, for comics at the time, was this kind of like hot director at the time.
Oh, for sure. The editor on the book was Bob Schreck, and we had known Bob from his time at Kamiko and then at Oni and also at Dark Horse. And he'd been sort of shepherding my work through that time, trying to get me gigs here and there. And when Bob was at Oni, he Bob was like, what you're talking about earlier about trying to draw influences from outside of comics. And Bob was like, really connected to like Hollywood, what was going on in Hollywood. And he thought, if there's a director that likes comics, because, most directors are visually oriented people and grew up on comics.
Hmm.
Um, I want to like entice some of those people to come into the world of comics. And Kevin was one of those people. Clerks was like red hot.
Hmm.
And he knew that Kevin had written some scenes for Clerks that didn't make the shooting script, that didn't never got shot. And so he brought him over to Oni and said, let's do a comic called Clerks Lost Scene. And it's this supposedly unfilmable scene that we're going to make a comic book out of. And he knew that I could do stuff that was like not strictly like caricature, but was in the spirit of, I could draw like the characters in the spirit of the actors so people would recognize who they were without being like Mort Drucker, and like Mad Magazine spoofs.
Right. It wasn't a
And
caricature, but it was
yeah,
recognizable.
yeah. And he also knew that like my storytelling was good enough that I could handle uh, Kevin like not being a seasoned comic book writer, being a screenwriter, and not understanding when necessarily to do panel breaks or page breaks. So he would let me sort of chop it up, chop up Kevin's screenplay and turn it into a comic book. And that pairing worked out really well. And we had a great time doing it. So Bob did that move again when he was at DC. Like, I'm going to pull in some Hollywood people. And Kevin had directed more films since then and was an even bigger name.
Hmm.
And he brought him on board. And he had already done Daredevil at
Okay.
Marvel.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, with Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti. And um, I think it was Bob's intention to woo not only Kevin but Joe and Jimmy too.
Hmm.
But at that time, Joe and Jimmy were also busily like revitalizing Marvel with Marvel Knights, and so they didn't want to leave that good thing. And then Joe eventually became EIC. So I think Kevin just sort of moved down his list of cartoonists he knew, And I was like, well, I can't. Mike Allred's busy, and Joe's got this other job. Maybe let's ask Phil. And so they asked me to come on board. And Shrek, like I said before, Shrek had been looking out for me for a long time, especially in terms of me working with my longtime inking partner, Andy Parks. Because Andy and I had been working at DC for a while there, but like not together.
Hmm.
For some reason, we were never put together, even though we were considered ourselves a team. And Shrek was like, no, these guys should be together. And so we Shrek knew that like Kevin was super busy and could like get pulled away from this at any time, and he didn't want the book to be late. So I think Kevin wrote 6 issues maybe before I even like got to draw number one. And we had a lot in the can before number one came out. And it was like a big thing. It was DC's number one book for a long time. And it was
Oh,
it
that's
was kind of new.
interesting.
Yeah, it was new territory for me because I'd never been what anyone would consider a hot artist. I've always been kind of a tweener, like too weird to be totally mainstream, but also not weird enough to be a like an auteur.
Hmm.
So um, I'd always been this like kind of guy who works at you know on those sort of I don't know how to describe it. Like I can work at Dark Horse on like their kind of books, but I'm not gonna ever draw Iron Man. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, yeah, I could, as you say, Dark Horse, like, I could see you on like a Hellboy. Like, I'm curious if
Yeah,
you probably have
right.
done
So
that.
I was sort of that yeah, I was sort of that tweener kind of guy. And so it was strange for me to like I said, I was never like a wizard top 10 guy, but there was like,
But you were then, I
uh,
mean, right?
yeah,
I mean,
for like that, for 2001, I had like two books in the top five. I had my Green Arrow book coming out, and I also drew a couple of issues of Bendis's Marvel Team Up book.
right, right,
The
right.
ultimate team up book. I drew issues 2 and 3, and those were huge sellers also. And so it was very weird. It was a very weird to go from somebody who was, I won't lie, like right before Green Arrow, I had like the worst year I'd ever had in comics.
Hmm.
Um, I had worked for some publishers that had gone belly up without paying me, and then I did some animation work, and there was like a hiccup in paying me there, and I was like, I need to get like a straight job maybe. And this is like the first time in my life that I'd ever had a thought like that. I was 30, and I was like, I can't believe I'm going to have to get like straight job.
Hmm.
And I was lucky that Green Arrow came along at the right time. And I also at that time I also wrote a book called The Coffin that came out from Oni that was like became like an underground hit, and like
Huh.
got option for a movie and stuff. So
Oh,
like it
wasn't
really was.
correct me if I'm wrong. Was there an animated movie or a
No, no,
okay,
it
all right,
never got
okay.
it never got made. But James Cameron bought it from me and Mike Huddleston, and so like we got paid, and like so it was like really was like the darkest before the dawn at that point in my career.
Huh.
But yeah, it was like to go from that to like having two top five books at the same time was like pretty startling.
That yeah, I mean that
And
must
it had
be
nothing. It had nothing to do with me. I know that. So that's what kept me humble about it. Was like, it's not me. It's the fact that it's like Kevin Smith and Brian Bendis, who
well, you
guys
say
I came
that,
up
but
with.
you say that, but it's like, there was a reason you were there at that time. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like
Yeah, yeah.
you
I came up with those guys. So it was like, um, those were my colleagues. So it was like it was cool to get. I just saw that as like Bendis and I started out at Caliber at like the same time,
huh.
and we were like moving in the same circles, and it was just like, this it's fun to work with my friend. I didn't think, hey, this is going to be good for my career. I thought, yeah, it's fun to work with Brian. Let's go make a Hulk comic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned that that ultimate team up. I mean, I don't mean to try to, make you feel old or anything, but like that was like one of my, you know, favorite thing. Or I won't say favorite. I won't go that. It won't be too flattering, but I really like that a lot. I still remember it to this day. I mean, it's a very it's like a very memorable, iconic cover on the Hulk one, right? If I
Yeah,
remember correctly,
yeah,
it's like Hulk's giant foot smashing
yeah. That
Ultimate
was
Spider-Man on the cover.
yeah, stepping on his chest. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's up there with there's a famous Secret Wars cover. Again, this is for people you'll know obviously, but for people who
Yes.
aren't like hardcore people, where like the Hulk is holding like a mountain and he's
Right.
preventing it from crushing everybody else. So kind of for me, it's up there with that in terms of like iconic
I appreciate that.
Hulk stuff. But yeah, I mean, it must have been it's I guess I didn't realize Green Arrow was like the top DC book at that time. Like
It
it's
was it
that's
was the top book. It was the top book in comics.
in all of comics. I mean,
Yeah. Like
it's
our
just
first,
wild.
I think our first 4 or 5 issues were number one.
Hmm. Just crazy to think.
And
Like,
but you,
sorry.
I think you remember that as sort of a recovery time, for comics. But it was a
Right.
slow recovery. Like you could be the number one book in comics and barely break 100,000.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that was the state we were in. Like we were getting royalty checks, and it was awesome. We were getting like nice royalty checks. But in the 90s, like before the crash in the go-go 90s,
Right. Yeah. There's no
you
comparison.
know, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's probably too inside baseball for this podcast, but
No. 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 Go for it.
I was at Matt Wagner's house once for after convention party. It was a really nice house, and he was showing us around, and we were like gasping, of course, because it's not only is it a nice house, but all sorts of cool original artwork on the wall and great
Hmm.
rare books and a beautiful library. And we were like, man, this is incredible. And he was like, yeah, Batman versus Grendel too.
Huh.
I was like, what? And he's like, this was paid for by Batman versus Grendel 2, which was one miniseries,
That's
And I was
wild.
like, and like he saw the look on my face and Andy's face, like we were like agog. And he slapped us on the back and he said, you guys picked the wrong time to have the number one books in comics. Because we were getting royalty checks, but yeah, like we were buying like a used Hyundai, not a
Right.
house.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's hard to even contemplate that period in the 90s or just like it seemed like independent comics,
Oh,
like especially at Image, just had a license to print money. Like
they did.
it's crazy.
Here's another perspective on it. At the time Youngblood came out, I also had a book at Malibu. A lot of people don't remember that Malibu distributed Images books at the beginning.
Hmm.
But I also had a book at Malibu called Rust, with my friend Steve Miller and with Andy Parks again. And it was about this guy who was like a monster made of rusty metal. And we got canceled because we only sold 32,000 copies.
Hmm.
For an
And that
indie
would be
book,
like, yeah, I mean,
like now you'd be a runaway hit if you were an indie book
yeah,
that sold
yeah, yeah.
30,000 copies. And
Yeah, I
like
mean,
then they were,
even at Marvel and DC, that would not be the
oh,
worst.
you'd
I
be
mean,
fine. You'd be fine. Yeah.
you wouldn't be canceled. I mean, you wouldn't be
No, you
lighting
wouldn't be
up the
canceled.
charts, but
You would not be canceled. And but Malibu and Image were so used to everything doing 100,000 copies at a minimum, that they were like, we can't be bothered with you guys. We're going to
and
pull the plug at issue 4.
100,000 would actually be low too, probably, I
Yeah.
imagine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was like whether or not they'd keep making a book if it sold 100,000.
Huh.
And it was not being read by 100,000 people, just to be clear. It was being
Right,
sold
right,
to
right, right,
100,000
right.
people.
Right. That's sort of the problem is that it's this whole
It's sort
speculator
it's sort of
market
the
of
it, it's sort of the opposite of the problem we have now, which is like a hit book can come out and sell like 70,000 copies, but it's being read by 300,000 people. You
because you
know,
think like people are like pirating
oh,
it or
yeah, sure, yeah. Like if you go to like you know what X-Men's numbers are sales wise, but if you go to like the X-Men Reddit, it's got like you know a million members, and
yeah, I mean it's
a million people are not buying X-Men.
yeah, I mean I've heard people talk about this idea. I remember a while ago there was a big comic book resources article where it was basically saying there's a lot of young people who will watch like a YouTube about
Yeah.
comics, but they're like not reading comics. I have mixed feelings about that because I think back to, when I was a kid in the, semi early days of the internet. I would be reading about, oh, there was a big Flash website, and I would read basically about every character in the Flash. But I also was reading comics. But my point in saying this is just to say, like, since the advent of the internet, it's sort of always been like this, I guess. But
Oh yeah. Darn these kids.
I mean, it's
No,
just a different world where what
yeah,
would you do in 1971 if you wanted to find out more about the Flash? Like there would
right.
be nothing.
You
You'd
would
just
have
have
to
to buy the comic books.
you'd have to do what I did, which is like buy fanzines, like
Yeah, yeah.
at Comic Cons and like learn things like in slow dribs and drabs. And like I was lucky, like when I was in high school, Jim Steranko's History of Comics came out,
Oh,
and
interesting.
yeah, and so like I immersed myself in all this golden age lore that was in those books, which was like all new information for me,
Hmm.
you know, like because there wasn't the internet and there was like absolutely zero scholarship about comics. So it was that book was like a huge lifeline to me.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't blame people for how they get their comics. Like I want people to get comics however they have to. But if you want more and new ones, somebody
You
needs to keep
gotta
us alive.
actually buy them.
Yeah, somebody has to keep a roof over my head.
How do you feel about, I mean, you probably would go to a grocery store or something and there'd be like a spinner rack, right?
Oh,
Like,
sure. Yeah, like
now
when I was
that's sorry, go ahead.
yeah, when I was a kid, I had different like I knew different drugstores and different grocery stores carried different things. So
Huh.
like I would beg my mom to drive me to the next town. I still live in this little town that I grew up in. I moved away and back many times, but I'm back in that little town again. And I would beg my mom to like drive me the 15 miles to the drugstore in the next town over because I knew they got Warlord, you know? And then the grocery store in the other next town over got all the Treasury editions. And the pharmacy uptown got Tomb of Dracula. So like I, I staked out all these different places to get my comics, and then of course I subscribed to like the ones I could not miss at the time were like Daredevil and Marvel Team Up. So I subscribed to those books.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was like, and like if you found like I came in late on X-Men because it didn't have great distribution. So like I started buying it like probably during the Hellfire Saga. Again, we're getting real deep in the weeds for the non-comics people.
I wouldn't
But that's
worry
the
about that really. I just,
that's the arc that introduces Kitty Pryde. So
huh.
um and that's like when I discovered it, and then like I had to scramble to find back issues.
Right. Yeah.
And
To even get the back issues, see,
yeah.
how do you even do it? I mean, it's hard to even contemplate.
Oh
There's no
yeah.
such
It
thing
was
as like
tough.
a
You had
trade
to
paperback at that time.
oh no. And you had to save your money. And uh it was I want to say it was like daunting but also exciting because like
It's
you
like the
knew
hunt.
you were yeah, and you knew you were in on something that other people weren't. It's like discovering a band like before they
Right.
blow up. And that's a really exciting feeling. And you so you had this like kind of here's another thing that can be like both galvanizing and detrimental. Like you feel like you're like in the in crowd about this comic book, about these characters, and it can make you like a lot of people now are overly possessive of those characters and they don't like when changes come to them.
Of the
But
X-Men? No.
yeah, I mean any characters, like people get kind of a weird ownership sensation about it.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with the internet and people not treating each other the way they would in person. But um it was sort of like being an in group, and especially for like kids that were like nerdy growing up, being in an in group was like a rare and comforting sensation for them, and comics provided that. And
Hmm.
um, the difficulty of collecting comics at that time made it like kind of a richer reward when you got what you were after.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why this sort of archetype of like the almost wizardly, super comics expert who, knows everything, has
Yeah.
everything. Like that's sort of why that archetype exists, because that actually was something of a feat at that time.
Oh, for sure.
Um, it's just kind of crazy to think. I mean, I get what you're saying 100%, that like I think that's a lot of the appeal and the sort of rise of comics and like the cultural consciousness, that it's sort of like an underdog story,
Yeah.
until that it's not anymore, until they
No.
became like seemingly, a huge part of our mainstream like media
Yeah.
culture is like comic book inspired. Which,
But what I
by the
think,
way,
what I
sorry, go ahead.
no, but what I think is still cool about that is there's this whole universe of people who are fans of the Avengers or whatever, or fans of Batman, that have never like cracked a comic book in their life. But
Right.
what's cool about that is like the people that like really care about those characters or really inspired by those characters can still go back to the world of comics and say, yeah, but this is where the meat of it is. This is where
Hmm,
this is the lab where all that stuff is developed. And
hmm.
this is a place where like there's not a committee meeting about every creative decision. So you can see like an author's vision come through and um and not be like, me not be noted to death by a studio.
Right.
And I think that's what's still magical about comics, and that's just superhero comics. Even cooler to see like people do their completely their own thing in like indie books and do stories that have nothing to do with adventure or horror or anything like that. Just comics that like are from their heart, and there's nobody between you and that, between you and the piece of paper, and then you putting what you put down on that piece of paper out into the world, either as like a web comic or a mini comic, whatever, or as a small press book. It's never been an easier time to get your vision out and to a wider audience.
Right. Yeah. And the things you could do, I mean, if you want to be, like a director, like a filmmaker, and you want to make like some kind of like superhero or even sci-fi or fantasy thing, it's like, okay, that'll be $150 million,
Right,
please, to like
right.
realize it on the screen. But exactly what you're talking about is comics is this sort of like wide open frontier that just like you could do anything. There's really no, the only
Oh, for
limit,
sure.
like as like only a writer and not really an artist beyond just like, messing around or whatever. The only limitation you have is like, don't ask an artist to do a skyscraper, do a whole city skyline, but then there's also
Yeah,
alien ships coming down, and also there's a guy riding on a Pegasus, and
yeah.
I
And we
struggle
can
with
see
that
through the
myself.
window. We can see
Right,
what
we
the
see
character
through
is
each
watching through the
individual
window.
window.
Yeah,
We see the people walking around to the
yeah.
street. That's
Speaking
something
of
I
that,
struggle with.
I just drew like a 4-page sequence for a new book, an unannounced book that like is probably like $30 million of screen time, and it was just
Huh.
4 pages of a book. I mean, and it's
Right.
like 4 pages out of my life, but if it were a film, it would be like months out of like a special effects team's life.
Yeah, it
You
might
know?
be upwards of a year or more, and it's going to be 100 people like working around the
Yeah.
clock, and arguably not great working conditions. But
Right.
I'm just curious. I mean, you kind of, you're at I would say you're at like the highest levels of like um these big, Marvel and DC, like the big mainstream companies. And you feel like even now, like there's no making things by committee, like there's no overly
I mean,
hardcore
there is a little.
notes.
Yeah. There's a little of that, and I don't want to say it never existed. It really like especially back in like the '60s at DC, like each editor had sort of a fief
Hmm,
that he ran like a feudal lord.
hmm,
Um, and he had very hard and it was always a guy, always had hard and fast rules about how their characters were to be presented.
Right. Like wasn't
Um,
like Mort Weisinger like pretty
yeah, yeah,
notorious for that?
that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
and uh, and still, even today, even like the Jack Kirby said something like in the '60s that that like, look, I know these characters we're creating at Marvel might seem secondary or foolish to you, but these are billion-dollar properties, believe me. And everyone's like, whatever, Jack. And flash forward to, you know, 2016, and Ant-Man is a billion-dollar property.
Right. He was
Guardians of the
absolutely right.
Galaxy is a billion-dollar property. He was right.
Yeah.
And Marvel and DC are catching on to that, or they do know that. They've always known that. But they also know that I think the people that run those places know that their bread and butter comes when they let us do our thing.
Hmm.
So you know they're gonna like keep a short leash on certain characters and certain properties, but they also know that like we said earlier, letting us experiment is like the cheapest way to find new cool stuff.
Yeah,
It
definitely. I
costs,
mean,
it costs like you know $10,000 to make a
right,
comic,
right, right.
and that's like a mainstream comic. It's even cheaper to make an indie comic. Um, like I I made a comic with my buddy Andy Kuhn called Fire Breather, and it wound up being like an animated feature on Cartoon Network, like one of
See
their
that
first, maybe.
I stumbled before. That's what I was thinking of. I got my
Yeah, it was
research a little confused.
right, and I just wrote that. I didn't draw that one, and like we wrote and drew it for nothing, you know.
Right. And
Um,
the show
like
probably cost millions of dollars.
oh yeah, it was the most expensive. It was the most expensive thing Cartoon Network had ever made at the time,
Huh.
and that's sort of why it never became a series. It was so expensive that I mean, it won the night on cable. It beat the NBA on cable. It was a big, it was a big premiere, but it was also like $7 million for an hour, which like they were like, we can't spend that kind of money on a
Uh,
cartoon, especially if like these two hayseeds own it. We don't own it, you know.
huh. So you totally owned it or?
Yeah, we own the character outright. It was an image book, and when we optioned it, like they didn't believe that we owned it. They were like, "No, your publisher has to own part of it." And we're like, "No, it's Image. We
Uh
own it all." And we had to have Eric Larson had to write them a letter because he was the publisher at the time. He had to write them a letter that says, "We don't own any of this. Believe
huh.
us." And
They should
so
have been happy about that. I mean, does that not that means it's
no,
just
it means they're not. Well, what happened after that was they used a lot of that technology on that Green Lantern show that came after that CGI Green Lantern show.
oh,
I don't know if you remember.
interesting. Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, yeah.
But that was something that was like a corporate property. Um, but what the point I'm trying to make is Andy and I made that what became like a multi-million-dollar feature. We made that from
For like
scratch.
pennies, practically.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think I mean, we paid the colorist and letter. Well, Andy lettered it, so we paid the colorist, and we gave Andy kind of a cheap stipend. So like we were making that book for like $3,000 an issue, and it became a multi-million-dollar thing. And like we got paid. Like in the end, we got paid more than we ever would have had we taken that book to Marvel or DC.
Hmm,
Just from film money.
hmm.
Um, so that's at its not to be like totally mercenary about all this, but that's what's really cool about comics is like you only need a little seed money to get the ball rolling and get your ideas out into the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's uplifting to me to think about. The only problem is if you spend the seed money, then you totally crash and bomb, which, is not ideal.
Yeah,
But
that
I mean,
happens too. I've had many comics that like I thought were as good or better than Fire Breather, but they didn't catch on with the public, and just how things are. You've got to be true to yourself and make the comics that you want to see, and accept the fact that sometimes those aren't the comics that the wider world wants to see.
Yeah,
And
definitely. I mean,
if you're not okay with that, you're in the wrong business.
yeah, of course. I mean, I think maybe it's William Goldman who said this, like the Hollywood screenwriter
Yeah.
guy. I could, or he said basically like nobody knows, they
No.
don't know,
If,
like,
if we knew, everything would be a hit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, why would you ever do the thing that's not going to make any money if you had
Yeah.
any way of accurately predicting that? I
Yeah.
sort of feel that that's a little bit of like a problem today that like the big movie studios and stuff like they want to do like a sure thing. They want like, okay, this is an
Yeah.
established brand and franchise. They want to eliminate risk. But see, the problem is like
Yeah.
we're
I
talking,
think,
it's all risk.
isn't
Like
that
there's
like
no.
I think that's like isn't there some catchphrase in Hollywood about you don't want to be the first, you want to be the second,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
to
I
like,
haven't heard that.
you want to be the second movie to cash in on a trend, not the first one, because the first one has
Right.
risk.
Right. Yeah. It's just, it's kind of silly thinking to me though, because you look back at like, oh, Star Wars is a mega huge hit, and it's because it was unlike anything that had ever really been done
Oh yeah,
before. That's why,
it's because
yeah,
it's
it's
because it's
just
George Lucas's fever. It's his fever dream, and
right.
you
It's
like, you need to be out there. You need to be out there investing in fever dreams instead of taking the wrong lesson and saying, I want a thing that looks like Star Wars.
right.
You
Yeah. I mean,
you
it's kind of
shouldn't say
like a
that.
catch 22 that it's
Yeah,
like
you should say,
Star
I
Wars
want
is
to think.
successful because it was like nothing else. Now
Yeah,
you
I
want to
want.
make more things like Star Wars that are just like Star
Yeah.
Wars. But don't you
You
see
don't
why
want more
that's not
Star Wars. You want more George Lucas's.
right? He has
And
kind of like a really good quote that I really like where he basically says something to the effect of like the way it used to work is that, these studios would hire some young kid and usually he would have crazy long hair and you basically give him a bunch of money and you tell him to go to the casino and go bet the money and then that's,
right.
that's what movie making is. Um I don't know. I've wondered in the past if this is kind of an out there idea, but I've wondered if it would be possible for um like these big publishers to do something like sort of like pilot season in TV. Like, well, what if they
Yeah.
what if they just made an investment of money? We're like, we're going to order a first issue, and it doesn't mean we're going to make the whole comic, but just like we're going to pay X amount of money just to make the first issue. And then through that, you
Well,
basically, similar to pilot season, you pick the ones that you feel, you're confident in or whatever.
yeah. I mean, well, we talked about that a little bit earlier, just tangentially when we brought up Marvel Knights.
Hmm.
Um, and also Top Cow did a promotion called Pilot Season once too, where
Oh,
they
yeah.
where they did exactly what you're. But but Marvel Knights was that sort of in a nutshell, where they were like, hey, we have some properties laying around that are kind of like dead weight. Nobody knows what to do with them. Let's give them to these kids and let them cut loose. And it's like, low risk, high reward if it works. And it worked
Right.
fantastically.
Right. It
Um,
worked extremely well. I mean, a lot of those things now are, you know, I would argue, you know, characters like, I would argue characters like Punisher are, sort of came to
yeah.
prominence through like the Ennis stuff at that time. I mean, you could say Daredevil had a big time renaissance through like,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Moon
through
Knight,
Brian Bendis's. Yeah, Moon Knight, of course. I mean,
Black
it's
Panther, for sure.
yeah, exactly. I mean, um
Um, it's so wild. It's kind of a aside, but it worked so well that Marvel's like, let's do it again. Let's go get this crop of new talent, from places like Oni and Dark Horse, and let them do the same thing. And they tapped Huddleston and I to come in right after the coffin and do our thing on Silver Surfer.
hmm.
And it all collapsed at the last minute, sadly, but it's like the best pitch we ever made. And I wish somebody would see it someday, but it was a lot of fun to do. But yeah, we
That must be
we
another
were
thing where it's that must be another thing where it's like, I'm working on Silver Surfer right now. I mean, for you, that must be, I mean, when you were coming up, like, I think you could say maybe the 70s was sort of the, peak Silver Surfer in a way
Yeah.
that, um, it just must be crazy to be like, okay, now I'm going to do a pitch for,
Oh,
something,
really? It was wild. Yeah, it was strange.
um, kind of transitioning a little bit. I mean, with Swamp Thing, uh, you actually didn't you come back later and then you were a writer on Swamp Thing for a
Yeah,
period?
just like not that long ago, when DC was doing their giant books in Walmart, um, I wrote uh, I wrote a Swamp Thing, like a 6 part, no, 5 part Swamp Thing story that ran in those those Swamp Thing giants, and I also wrote Teen Titans Giant too. Right when the right when they pulled the plug on all that,
Hmm.
so I got to write some Swamp Thing and some Teen Titans, which were like both big thrills for me because like Teen Titans was also, when I was in high school, it was also like just behind X-Men in terms of hotness because it
Right.
was
No, I
Marvel.
mean
Yeah.
it had to be one of the top books, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, right. It was right behind X-Men. It was Wolfman and Perez, and it was like the only DC book that felt like a Marvel book.
hmm,
You know.
hmm. It's very comparable to X-Men.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, I mean it's even, again for people who are not extremely hardcore comics people, I mean even for me it's kind of crazy to think like there was a time when Teen Titans was like the hottest thing in the comic book world. Like it's just crazy to
Oh,
think
for
that,
sure.
you
And
know,
it's cool. And like taking that team as like a case study, it's cool to see like all the different lives that Teen Titans has had since then and how it means different things to different people. You know, like to my kids' generation, it's Teen Titans Go, you know, and
Right.
and that sort of like comedy take on it. And to different generations, it's like it means a lot of different things. And it's sort of what's it's sort of what's cool about these sort of eternal characters is that you can do take after take on them. Spider-Man's another great example with Miles Morales and with
Hmm.
Spider-Gwen. They can have these second acts that you really can't anticipate, and there's no telling where a character is going to evolve. And even when like you sort of feel like, oh, this is stale, this can't go anywhere. Take a character like Tarzan. You think, oh, there's so much material about Tarzan. What new can you do with Tarzan? Believe me, somebody's got it. Somebody's figured it out.
Hmm.
And if that person is given a chance to express that, there's going to be a cool Tarzan thing down the road. You never know.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think. You've worked on several characters that are kind of like that. Like, I think you could make a strong case that, like, oh, Green Arrow, like, you know, a cynical person could be like,
Yeah,
oh, that's just sort of like a Batman ripoff, like, has no potential. But then, like you're saying, 2001, it's top book
yeah.
in the industry.
And
You
also
get the,
we're on year 80 of Green Arrow. You know, it's still
oh,
going.
crazy.
And I
Yeah,
just
no, I mean,
that was like
sorry.
my most recent thing for DC was helping out on the current run. Like I've drawn a couple, like I drew a fill-in issue and I've drawn a couple fill-in chapters and I'm doing covers for the book right now. Um, it's like I it doesn't feel like it, but like it's so hard to believe that there was almost 20 years between my well, there was exactly 20 years between when I left the drawing the interiors of that book and when I came back to help out now. So it's
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that's one of the
mind
things I
bending.
have here in my notes here that like, yeah, you're doing Green Arrow like again today. Like that's got to be like you just said, it's got to be surreal. That's like hard to believe it was like 20 years ago. Is there like do you feel like there's a big difference and like do you feel like you're jumping back into that mode of like drawing, do you feel like there's like you're drawing sort of do you feel like you're sort of like
It's a new
picking up where you
character.
left off?
No, I feel like it's a new character.
Hmm.
There's been so much added to the lore in that 20 years that
Right.
um
20 years in comics may as well be 1,000 years.
yeah. And that 4 years I drew it is like kind of just a a blip in an 80-year span for that character. Although I think a lot of people like remember those issues fondly. Um, there's you never know when like the next definitive run on a character's coming, you know. So
Right.
like you can't be too precious about like what came before. You just
Hmm.
have to sort of um, take it as it comes. You know, I have this old adage that I live by, which is that quality equals canon in comics.
Huh.
No matter how many times they try to say, okay, this is the new timeline, this is how things go in this universe. The stuff people remember and the stuff that gets adapted to film or animation or whatever is the good stuff.
Yeah.
And so quality becomes canon, even if it's not meant to be, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you look at you look at like the Dark Knight Returns
Yeah,
and that whole concept of having like a Robin's costume in a glass case because Robin
right,
died. Like that actually
right,
was before Robin actually dying in the comics, right? I mean, if I
uh,
have that correct, I mean,
right.
and then that whole idea of the
I
glass
think they're
case
pretty
is
close to
just
concurrent. Yeah,
oh, it was like the same time.
yeah, and that's sort of the way. But I mean, if you look at like the upcoming Daredevil show, it's Born Again
Hmm.
because Born Again was so good, not because like there are not other Daredevil stories to choose from, but because that Daredevil story is so impactful. Um, that's what's going to get adapted.
Right. I mean, how can
And
you not do it?
yeah, so I think I don't try to get hung up on like the fact that you know to fit all those Robins in, they all had to be Robin for like a month,
Hmm.
you know, to work in the Batman timeline.
Right,
Uh,
right.
you know, uh,
That sort of thing
but
I don't even really worry about at all because it
yeah,
how it's Batman is how old is Batman? 32? I
right,
mean,
right,
it's everything that he has gone through would have to be an insane amount of
yeah,
stuff happening like I think like in terms of canon, people just have to live with the idea. It's sort of like The Simpsons, like,
yeah,
Peter Parker will be, 20 something like for eternity. Like, it's
yeah.
which
And you
there is,
just like I said,
it is a little
and
sad in a
people,
way though, because in the early
yeah,
days, like Stan in those early Spider-Man comics, it'd be like, all right, Spider-Man graduated high school, now he's going to college.
now
Like
he's going to college. Yeah.
they kind of
Oh
were
yeah, and
aging.
when I started reading Spider Man, he was out of college and like you know he was working at the Bugle and like was an assistant TA, you
Huh.
know. But like I said, you can't get. I think that's one of the. I think that's one of the advantages that manga has over Western comics is that they're so creator owned and creator driven that the stories have endings
Hmm.
and if like even if you look at something like Dragon Ball, there's an ending and then a new iteration of it, but it's like a linear controlled by the creator kind of thing. And I'm not saying there couldn't be new Spider-Man comics made every day, but it would be cool to see like Peter Parker's story have a beginning, middle, and end, and then maybe Spider-Man would be about, you know, Mayday Parker now or whatever.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It would we missed that boat. We sort of froze them in amber, and it's hard to get them back out of it. But I think it's a problem. But I also think it speaks to the power of these characters that doesn't really hold them back. You know that
Hmm.
people are still interested in the core idea of Spider-Man, which is like a hero driven by guilt, or the core idea of the Hulk, which is uh, also a hero driven by guilt.
Yeah.
I think that's what
I'm
I
starting to
think
see a lot
maybe
of guilt in these Marvel
I think that's
characters.
what made Marvel I think that's what made Marvel more relatable. Like their characters weren't just like, "Oh, I should be a superhero." Their characters were like motivated were motivated by their own internal flaws and those flaws being, you know, brought into the real world.
Hmm.
Um but that's another topic.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
mean, I sort
the
of feel like
timelessness version helps.
Yeah, I feel like there are I have complicated feelings about this kind of thing because I think there are certain characters that, there's certain things that I don't want you to make sequels to. Like, hopefully it'll be good, but like Beetlejuice 2, for instance, like to me,
Right.
like, I'm trying to say, like, hopefully it'll be good. I'm not trying to be a hater, but I dread the day that I see that and it's just like a heartbreaker for me. But hopefully I'll be wrong.
Yeah.
But there are certain things like, like James Bond, like I think
Yeah.
you could just make James Bond like for eternity, pretty much. Like, or
Right.
Batman, for instance. Like, I have no problem with the idea that they would just make Batman movies forever. But you know, part of you was like, well, don't you get it by now? Like, Batman punches the Joker, he goes to Arkham. Like, don't you
Yeah.
get it? Like, isn't it like how many Batman movies do we really need? Like, I could see someone else besides me saying, and for me,
Yeah.
it's like Sherlock Holmes. Like Sherlock
Yep.
Holmes could just there's some things that have reached like I would argue they've reached like the level of mythology where, each generation will tell it anew. And then there's other things like, like I don't want to see a Citizen Kane 2, like
Right.
there's
Right.
some things that I feel you should not mess with. But then, every once in a while there's something like, Mad Max Fury Road, for instance, where you'd think, why should that, like, a cynical person
Yeah.
would be like, don't make a sequel to Mad Max like 30 years after the fact, like, but then it turns out to be amazing. So I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think there's really any rules
Well,
for
I think the
what you can
secret
do.
ingredient in all of those is that you have inspired creators involved in those things, and that's the tough part about, like we said before. If we knew how it worked, everything would be a hit,
Hmm.
and if you knew which creators to trust with your characters or which creators to trust with an investment in their talent, everything would be a hit and everything would work. You don't. You have to try and just see what works.
Hmm.
And also the other thing you have to be open to is like things. Not everything is going to be a blockbuster. You know, some things are going to just be middling successes, and that's cool. Accept that. It's hard to get money people to accept that sort of fact that some things are just not going to be huge.
Yeah. I mean, and when you publish, I mean, 40, 50 books a month or whatever, like just sort of like it's a necessary thing that not everyone could be the
Yeah.
big hit. Like you got to have some that are what, like you say, like, middling success. Um Switching gears a little bit, are there like is there any advice that you would give to young artists like just starting out? I know it's like a completely different landscape today, but
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned earlier, there's never been a better time to like. There's nothing standing between you and getting your work out in the world,
hmm,
um, with the internet and with the convention scene now. Like, there's a convention every weekend, multiple conventions every weekend somewhere. And if you've got the stomach for it, you could be a road warrior and just self-publish your comic and go hawk it by hand at shows for all year long. Um, or you could just throw it up on the web and see who finds it. Or you could work. There's a ton of really great small publishers now doing really impressive work that you could, apply to and try to get your book through there. It's a better time than ever to get your book seen. It maybe is not the greatest time ever to get paid for that. you
hmm.
know, like, I mean, also Kickstarter. I forgot to mention Kickstarter. You could always kickstart your book. Um, Back when I started out, this is like totally irrelevant now to talk about how I broke into comics because that same ecosystem doesn't exist.
So what would you
But
do
back when
then?
I
You'd go to a con and you'd
oh you
like
take your
stand
you
in
tuck your
line and
yeah you tuck your portfolio under your arm and wait in line to talk to editors, and if they had a book, they might give you an assignment on the spot. That that is pretty rare now. I mean, it was pretty rare then even, but I got gigs that way multiple times. Um, I got my first Marvel work that way. I got my first like color work that way. My first black and white work that way. Um, and uh, and I got paid for all those things. Maybe not like a great living wage, but I got paid. Now it's a different scene. You can put your book online and it's seen by 100,000 people and not make a living doing that. It's hard to make a living that way until such time you have enough material to maybe do a collection.
Hmm.
So it's uncharted territory, like how to be a financial success in comics, but there are no rules about getting your work out there. And so I think the thing I would tell a young creator is you're a cartoonist like today. You're not going to be a cartoonist someday. You're a cartoonist today. So there's nothing between you and doing the work and then putting the work out there. And maybe you find, and hopefully you find your people that way. Sometimes you find your people right away, and sometimes there's enough of them there that you can make a living out of this. Sometimes it takes years to find your people, and sometimes there's not a lot of your people. You don't know until you take that risk. And I don't know a way to like teach people how to have that desire, because that desire is essential to success, but it can be detrimental also, and you don't know when you don't know the
Right.
difference. Like when
Right.
it's
Right.
inside you, you don't know the difference. And so, like I said before, I would be doing this if I weren't making a living at it. I'm lucky that I snuck into this industry at a time when, um, like my talent was acceptable to enough people that I could worm my way in and just be like a fixture when other people came into the industry. So now they sort of accept me. Um, so that drive has got to be there. And I can't teach you how to have that drive. And also, I can't talk you out of having that drive when it's not working.
Hmm.
So it's tough to explain. Like, like if you're a musician, there's only a handful of people that are filling up football stadiums, with their tour. There's a lot of people one step down from that can fill up a theater, and then there's even more bands a step down from that can fill up a bar. But the vast majority of people are in their garage, you know, um, and they're not going to make a living at it, but they have
Hmm.
the same desire. And like financial success, like almost can't be a consideration if you really care about this. You have to do it because you love to do it. And if you're lucky, you'll make money at it. It doesn't mean be stupid about it and ruin your family and quit your day job. But um, if that fire's there, it's there. And don't wait around for it to happen. Just do it. And the smallest thing, the smallest mini comic might have that germ of an idea in it that catches the attention of a larger publisher or a wider audience. And that's your stepping stone to being able to do this for a living. So the only way to prove it is to go out and do it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Excuse me. What you were saying about it's hard to know when the desire is actually a bad thing. Like, it's sort of a double-edged sword that,
Yeah.
you have an ambition, you have a drive, but then, we could probably think of people who are, you know, bad people, like because of like too much of a like a I don't even know what you call it, like too much of a
A drive.
hunger for,
Yeah.
insatiable need, I guess, to be the biggest best thing ever, and then they
Yeah.
often become the biggest and the best.
Yes.
But
I think it's possible to separate that drive from like how they conduct their lives. I'm saying like sometimes you can be like a healthy, good, well-rounded individual and not know when to call it quits on something like this.
hmm,
But if you're going to make it, you can't call it quits on something like this.
right.
So it's really tough. And if I look back on my own life, when I was telling that story about right before Green Arrow when it was really dark, uh, that's a time I probably should have pulled the plug and did not. You know, like we had a rough year as a family, and my kids were really little. And if I had been thinking clearly, I would have been like, oh, I need to go get a straight job of some kind for at least a year or something. But I had this, I had these blinders on about not about success, not about financial success, but about getting my work out there. And it kept me plugging along, and it did lead to success. But I did not know it at the time that I was probably off course. Um, and it's tough. It's the most difficult conversation you can have with somebody in this business is like they'll come to me and they say, why haven't I made it? And they're like 90% there, you know.
Hmm.
And you have to say, like, a big part of this business is your skill level, but also there's also luck. um, and nobody wants to talk about, like, really talented people don't like to talk about the luck that is involved in this business.
Right,
Sometimes it's
right,
you're in the right place at the right time, or you were at the right party, or um, your friend knew the right job that was opening up.
right. Like you don't want to imagine, like, what do you mean? Like I'm just the best ever. Like and luck had nothing to do with it. Like why can't you do what I
Yeah,
did? You know, like
yeah. A lot of like successful people have that sort of pathological will to power idea about their own success,
hmm,
because to think it's kind of horrifying to think, well, there was some random chance in there.
right. Anything could have
Um,
happened.
yeah, and I think I've had like sort of an even keel career where I haven't had really high highs or really low lows. That made me realize, like, I can look back with perspective and see where people helped me, and where people like bridged me through a difficult time with like kind of make work that they didn't have to give me. Um, so I can see the ups and downs that would come from just twists of fate. And so it's hard to counsel somebody that is really wrestling with that. It's because you don't know, there's sort of this intractable thing in there that we were talking about, which is like, if you want to make it, you have to suffer through this time when it's not easy. But also, I don't want you to like crash on the rocks, you know? I don't want you to like destroy your family over something like this.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. There's
and
kind of
that's
a
goes to all creative arts, you know. Trying to make a living at creative arts is like a really scary proposition, but it's also, when it does work, it's a really satisfying proposition.
there's kind of a funny excuse me, funny like Jack Black Tenacious D song where he's saying, you know, he's saying like quit your job, like work on your
Yeah,
craft, you know, work on your craft. And, you know, in a year we'll come back and like, we'll, you know, we'll look at your stuff. And if it's bad, we will tell you to stop. Like you must stop now. Like, you know, you don't have it. I'm sorry. You know,
yeah,
it just kind of, you know, how, you know, it's obviously the joke, the song is tongue in cheek. Like it's not meant to be
yeah.
serious or whatever, but I mean, there is
And
that
also,
element where, sorry.
you have no idea when somebody's going to have their breakthrough moment. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, um, I have been following a lot of artists like for many years, you know, for, you know, 10 plus years. And there are people who, a guy just sent me a thing today for like a comic I'm going to have coming out on Kickstarter soon where, you know, I had been tempted maybe 5 or 6 years ago to try to work with this guy, but I didn't think that he was quite there yet. And then he just sent me a thing today, that it's just like this, you know, this guy has the potential to be huge. I think you know, I
right.
don't know, you know, who knows about that. It's funny. I think, you know, I did a little bit of research for this where I think I saw you saying you worked with like Daniel Warren Johnson like fairly early. Like, is that right? Like you put him in a I think you
Oh,
put him you put
I mean, we did an anthology story together, but
right, you
like
did it and this was way before
well, I
he was
mean, you
big.
could tell he was going to make it.
That's what I was gonna
Even
say. I think I found an interview with you where you were saying like this guy's gonna be a superstar.
right.
You said in the interview, and you were 100% absolutely right.
Yeah.
You
I think
just,
when you're in the position that you're in, when you're trying to find artists to work with, you have to hire on potential. You know,
right, 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 right,
it's like drafting baseball players out of high school.
right,
You can't wait around and see if they learn to hit a curve. You've got to take them just when you see the raw talent, and
right.
because if you
You've got
wait
to
till
be
they
able
can
to
hit the
see
curve, yeah, if you wait till they can do it all, the Yankees are coming for them. You know,
exactly. Yeah, you got to see who is going to be huge, even if you never worked with them. Like who is just on an arc to get better and better and better. Um,
oh, there's
it's
so many creators that I bookmarked. You know, I was like, this person's almost there, and then just because like things happen in my career, I get busy, I move from one project to another, and I don't put the thing together with that creator, and I missed them by 4 months, and in that 4 months, they're huge, and they're
yeah,
not coming
yeah.
back. You know,
Yeah, I mean that's I feel like that's happened to me 100 times, but
yeah,
um, it's there's all it's kind of speaking to what you're talking about. I mean, how do you tell people, um, that they shouldn't continue or whatever? I mean, there's also people I could think of who I really felt this guy, this person is amazing. They're going to be huge, but anything could happen in your
yeah,
life that sort of derails that. And then like, oh, like they sort of never took off, but
yeah,
it's not necessarily because they weren't super talented. It's just like who,
right.
I'm not,
Circumstances,
yeah, circumstances. I'm not looking over their shoulder their whole life. Like I don't know what's going, for all I know, there was a bad divorce, there was a health problem,
right?
it could be any number of, there's also a lot of stuff going on in the world today where like, let's say you were, an artist in Ukraine or, Palestine or whatever. And,
Right.
it's like, it's easy for me as like a spoiled, privileged American to
Yeah.
sit back and
Yeah.
be like, well, why aren't you working on your comic books? Like, it's
Right.
because,
Right.
there could be a million factors that could make the difference between someone being a superstar and, or, sort of fizzling
Yeah.
out. Um,
I would never. I mean, at the root of all this, I just have to say, I would never tell anybody to quit. I would never say you got to pull the plug. Um, but yeah, you really don't know what's going on in anybody's life, and there are a lot of people that, like a lot of create, like I think Jeff Parker coined this term called playground legends. There are a lot of really great comic book artists that are never going to make a comic,
huh,
ever. But they're going to be on Twitter and on Instagram, like blowing the doors off everybody with like, one sketch that they spend a week on.
right.
And
Yeah, it's not
they're playground legends. They're never going to draw a page.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
That's not how the books
but
get made.
but that's not because they're lazy necessarily. It might be because they just know that like the grind of making comics is not in them, and it is a grind. You got to draw pages on days you don't have it, like
Hmm.
days you don't want to draw. You've got to draw, and a lot of people aren't cut out for that. A lot of people can't be creative under those circumstances. So no judgment at all. The people that make that decision that this isn't for them, or that maybe they can just make a living doing prints and going to cons, whatever.
There's also
Um,
stuff like, I just want to do covers. And,
yeah,
that's the kind of work I want to do. I want to do concept design for, movies
yeah,
and TV shows. It's like
all
arguably,
valid.
yeah, no, I mean, it's arguably, in my darker moments, you could say that's probably smarter than trying
Yes,
to, just make comic books.
yeah. There are
You
a lot
know,
of people that are, like hit that eject button when, because comics is hard. The money is not great for the most part, and I mean it's okay. I've had a great living and a great life from comics, and I'm definitely like a B C level talent. I'm not a superstar, but I have a comfortable life from comics. Um, uh, so it's possible, but um, it's still tough. You know, you've got to put a lot of work in, and sometimes it's not rewarding, and sometimes you're working on assignments you don't believe in, and it's very difficult. But it's also way, way, way better than having a straight job.
Huh. Yeah. Um, I don't want to keep you too long if I don't know how long you could talk or whatever, but
Oh, I mean, we can do another 10 minutes or so.
okay, sure. We can just wrap it up here if you want. That
Well,
could be fine.
if you had notes you wanted to go over and get to, if you had important stuff, that's cool.
Not really. I mean, I'll probably cut. I'm almost certainly going to cut all this out, but like I could literally go for like, 3 hours. I just don't want to keep, I think that's crazy to keep you that long.
Yeah, I've
But
still got to work tonight a little bit.
but where can people find you, and like what are the latest things that you've got coming out soon that it's like on the horizon?
Yeah, um, I have an uh, I have an unannounced book with a legendary comic book writer. I'm felt really lucky about the last 10 years of my career. I only work with great writers. Um, and there's another one coming down the pike that I haven't worked with yet, and he's a legendary creator. And we're gonna have a book out later this year that I'm drawing right now, and I can't talk about it. I'm sorry. Um, but I just, like I said earlier in the interview, I just came off a run where I was like kind of pitching in on Green Arrow, like doing fill-in issues and scenes here and there throughout the book and covers, so you can see me there. Um, and I'm, bumping around doing anthologies. I'm going to be part of that new EC line that Oni is doing,
Oh, cool.
and oh, I can't talk about that either.
Sort of the comic book
All the
story
stuff
a
I
little
can't
bit.
talk about. I feel stupid. But yeah, Gotham City Year One is out in hardcover now. If you want to go hunt it down, I'm really proud of that work, and I hope people enjoy it. And I've always got stuff in the. I'm not going to go away. Like they'll have to drag me out of here in a
Uh,
body bag.
all right. Well, thanks so much for doing this, Phil. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, Seth. That was a pleasure.